I stood on the porch of my son's home in Vermont on Christmas Eve, the snow clinging to my boots and a suitcase in one hand, a bag of carefully wrapped gifts in the other. I was dressed in an emerald green dress I'd saved all year for, hoping to look nice in the family photos. I imagined warm hugs from my grandchildren, the scent of cinnamon and roast turkey, the sound of laughter. But when the door opened, my son Jacob looked at me like I was a complete stranger. "Sorry, I think you have the wrong house," he said, without a flicker of recognition. Jacob. "It's me, it's Mom. He didn't blink. "There's no Jacob here. And then he closed the door. For a long second, I just stood there, stunned. Not cold from the snow, but from the hollowness that opened in my chest. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't a mistake. It was rejection, cold and unmistakable. That moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was the final crack in a foundation that had been eroding for years. I'd given my life to raising Jacob and his sister Emily after losing my husband at 25. I worked night shifts, skipped meals, and sent checks long after they were grown. But standing outside that house with no place to go, I realized something had ended, and maybe, just maybe, something new was waiting to begin. I wasn't always invisible. There was a time I was everything: nurse, cook, tutor, chauffeur, therapist, and cheerleader. After my husband Michael died in a car accident when I was just 25, I didn't have the luxury of grieving. Jacob was 15, Emily 13, and suddenly I had to hold our entire world together with trembling hands. We lived in a small home outside Hartford, Connecticut, barely scraping by on 2 incomes. After the funeral, I crunched the numbers. On 1 income, it wasn't just tight, it was impossible. So I sold the house. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment near the hospital where I worked night shifts. Weekends, holidays, those were just more hours to pick up. I learned to stretch every dollar, cutting my own hair, sewing Halloween costumes, packing lunches. From scratch, I even kept that old Buick running for 12 years with duct tape on the bumper and prayers under the hood, but I never complained. When Emily wanted to join the school orchestra, I found a used violin on layaway. When Jacob got accepted to NYU, I took on a 3rd shift to cover the deposit. I celebrated their wins like they were my own, and they were. I had sacrificed everything so they could become someone, and they did. Jacob graduated with honors, got a job at a financial firm in Boston, and married his college sweetheart Lauren. Emily moved to Chicago and worked in marketing. From the outside, it looked like I had succeeded. They were healthy, educated, and independent, but then the phone calls stopped. Birthdays became an afterthought. Quick texts if I was lucky. Visits, fewer and further between. I told myself it was fine. They were busy. That's what I had worked for, so they could have full lives. But deep down, I was shrinking. My sister Donnie used to say, "You gave them everything. They should be calling every week." But I brushed it off. I didn't want to guilt them. I didn't want to be that mom, the one who couldn't let go. So I kept giving. Even after they had good jobs and homes of their own, I sent them money, $1,000 each month, quiet support, no questions asked. Jacob needed help with a down payment. Emily had daycare bills. One time she called crying because her husband's commission check fell through. I sent more. They texted thanks, sometimes. But never, "How are you, Mom?" Never, "Are you okay?" Looking back, it didn't happen all at once. There was no explosion, just erosion, a missed birthday here, an ignored voicemail there, a thank you that never came. Each small moment chipped away at something I couldn't quite name at the time. And I ignored the ache, told myself. This is what mothers do. We give, we wait. We hoped, but standing on Jacob's snowy porch that Christmas Eve, after he looked me in the eye and pretended I didn't exist, I felt it. The final snap, the truth I'd been too proud or too afraid to admit. I wasn't loved, I was used, not for my presence, Not for my stories or my laughter or my hugs, but for what I could offer, and I had offered everything. The hardest part wasn't the door closing in my face. It was realizing that behind that door was a room full of people who didn't miss me, didn't ask about me, didn't even notice I was gone. That night, as I sat in a quiet hotel room, one I booked last minute out of necessity, not by invitation, I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I just stopped. I stopped sending money. I stopped waiting for calls. I stopped asking to belong. For the first time in decades, I did something wildly radical. I chose myself. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was angry, though I had every right to be, but because my mind was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. There was no guilt spiraling through my thoughts, no mental checklist of what to send, who to remind, how to stay relevant. Just stillness. Cold, lonely, unfamiliar stillness. And in that stillness, something inside me stirred. Asterisk. The next morning, I opened my banking app with calm fingers and canceled every automatic transfer to my children. It took less than 60 seconds. $1,000 to Jacob, another 1,000 to Emily. Gone. Done. The same transfers I had sent without fail for over a decade. Through layoffs, through COVID, through my own back pain and rising rent, ended with the swipe of a finger. I stared at the screen. No buzz. No thank you. No just checking in. Just silence. And peace. It wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about what the money represented. My place in their lives. Or more truthfully, my price. That realization shook me more than Jacob's cold rejection ever could. I had let myself become a silent lifeline, a convenient, invisible hand that was only ever noticed when it stopped giving. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and looked around. Beige walls, a TV still glowing with the news, snow piling up quietly. Outside the window, I had spent my life in rooms like this, temporary, functional, quiet. But this time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like a clean slate. I thought about all the things I had never done. The travel blogs I bookmarked but never dared act on. The volunteer programs for retired nurses I saved in my email. The fade map of the world I once hung on the fridge, each city circled in hopeful writing. Bangkok, Lisbon, Cusco. I used to whisper those names like promises. Then I'd close the tab and send another check. No more. I pulled up a travel website and typed Bangkok, Thailand. It was a name I had spoken to no one, just myself, in quiet moments when I dreamed of the version of me who wasn't always waiting for the phone to ring. I clicked book on a one-way flight. Departure 2 days from now. I didn't shake. I didn't second guess. I just breathed. And for the first time in decades, I felt something I almost didn't recognize. Excitement. Later that day, my phone finally buzzed. 25 missed calls. 15 from Jacob, 10 from Emily. Dozens of texts followed. Some panicked, some blunt. None asked where I was. None asked if I was okay. They asked why the money didn't go through. Mom, I need that for Noah's daycare. I'm about to be late on my mortgage. Call me now. Not a single are you safe. So I turned my phone face down on the nightstand and walked to a nearby cafe. I ordered a cappuccino and a breakfast sandwich and sat by the window. I watched the snow melt in the morning light and let it all go. The weight, the shame, the invisible chains of obligation I had worn like armor. I wasn't vanishing. I was finally becoming someone again. Asterisk. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emily. I hesitated, staring at the screen. Part of me still hoped her voice would be warm, that I'd hear even a sliver of the little girl who once ran into my arms with scraped knees and wide eyes. But when I answered, her tone was clipped, almost annoyed. Mom, finally, what's going on with the transfers? Jacob said his didn't go through either. No greeting, no concern, just money. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching snowflakes gather on the cafe window. I've decided to discontinue the monthly transfers, I said, gently but firmly. There was a long pause. You've what? She finally snapped. You can't just do that. I'm counting on that money for the baby's nursery. I'm sorry to hear that, I replied calmly. I suggest you and Daniel revisit your budget. Her voice sharpened. This is about Jacob, isn't it? He told me what happened. It was a misunderstanding. You're overreacting, I could have argued. I could have reminded her of the years I had been dismissed, the birthdays ignored, the endless giving met with silence. But instead, I said, it's not about Jacob, it's about me. I've allowed myself to disappear piece by piece, and I'm done. She let out a cold, exasperated laugh. Mom, you're almost 60. This isn't the time for some midlife crisis. I smiled softly, the insult rolling off like rain. I'm 58, and for the first time in my life, I'm choosing me. You're just going to cut us off because your feelings got hurt? She asked, her voice rising. After everything you've done. I closed my eyes for a second, breathed in. Supporting you for years isn't cutting off, it's stepping back. I'll send a gift for the baby, just like you send me birthday cards when you remember.
Teacher.
Then I ended the call, and I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel rage. I felt clear. That evening, I walked back to my hotel and began making quiet, radical decisions. I called my landlord and gave notice on my apartment. I rang up Donna, my sister and lifelong cheerleader, and asked if she could help me pack. We'd sort through what mattered, donate what didn't. And then I called the hospital where I had worked for 32 years. I thanked them. I resigned. No dramatic goodbye, no cake in the break room, just a promise to send a formal letter later. It was time to let go of the life that had demanded everything of me and given back so little. That night, I ordered room service. I ate alone, and I wasn't sad. I imagined Jacob and Emily whispering over the phone, trying to understand the woman they'd always taken for granted, wondering where their mother had gone. But I hadn't vanished. I had simply come home to myself. Asterisk for decades. I was the steady hand, the open wallet, the voice on the other end of every crisis. I was the invisible foundation holding up everyone else's world. Now, I was finally laying the first brick of my own, and in the quiet of that hotel room, with a one-way flight booked and no more expectations pulling at me, I smiled, not because I was running, but because, at last, I was free. The next morning, just as I was zipping up my suitcase and folding away the last pieces of the life I was leaving behind, there was a knock at my hotel room door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, Jacob stood there. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept. His coat was wrinkled, his breath shallow, like he'd run here straight from a panic he couldn't name. Mom, he said softly, we need to talk. I stepped aside without saying a word, motioning toward the armchair by the window. He sat down, awkward. Unsure, I remained standing, folding my hands in front of me, steady, grounded in a way I hadn't felt in years. You've caused quite a panic, I said calmly. He looked up, searching my face for something, familiarity, softness, perhaps forgiveness. But what he found was someone different, someone who had stopped asking to be included. Someone who no longer measured her worth by the approval of her children. I'm not angry, I continued. I'm just clear. Jacob opened his mouth, but I raised a hand gently. I'm leaving tomorrow, I said, not just Boston, not just this hotel. I'm leaving behind the version of myself who accepted being treated as an afterthought, the version who showed up quietly, year after year, hoping for scraps of affection. She's done. He shifted in his seat, visibly uncomfortable. You're overreacting. Christmas was just messy. We didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean. I echoed, but you did, and not just on Christmas. It's been years, Jacob. Years of silence, of taking without giving, of reducing me to an ATM with a familiar voice. His eyes flickered with something, shame maybe. But I didn't press. Do you know how many birthdays you miss? I asked. Not just mine, yours. I remembered everyone, cards, gifts, thoughtful letters, and in return, a text. Sometimes not even that. Jacob lowered his gaze. Asterisk. I walked to the window, looking out at the snowy street below. You asked me for money when you bought your first home. I sent it. When no one needed dental work, I paid the bill before you even followed up. I've given and given, even when I had little left for myself. I turned back to him, but when I stood on your porch this week, excited to see my family, you looked me in the eyes and told me I had the wrong house. He flinched. I don't need an apology. I said, I need a boundary. Mom, I was just trying to keep things peaceful. Elaine's parents, you wanted to keep me hidden. I interrupted, voice still steady. You wanted the benefit of my love, my labor, my money, but not my presence. The room went quiet. After a while, Jacob said, So what now? I'm flying to Thailand tomorrow, I told him. I booked a small riverside place outside of Bangkok. I'm going to volunteer at a local clinic for retired nurses. I might travel, I might write, I don't know. But for once, the future is mine. He looked like he didn't recognize me, and perhaps, in that moment, he truly didn't, because I wasn't the woman who had stood silently in his doorway, waiting for approval. I was someone new, someone free. I do love you, Jacob, I said finally. But I'm done proving it to people who don't show it back. He stood up slowly. I didn't mean for it to come to this. Neither did I whispered, and with that, I watched my son walk out of the hotel room, not knowing whether he'd come back. But this time, I wasn't waiting, because I was already on my way. That evening, after Jacob left, I sat alone in my hotel room, watching the sun melt slowly behind the buildings. The sky had turned a soft amber, casting warm light across the blank white walls for the first time in decades. I felt no weight on my chest. No nagging voice in my head wondering if I had done enough, been enough, given enough, because I had. I had given everything. And now, finally, I was giving something back to myself. I opened my tablet, reviewed my travel itinerary one last time, and then did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote in my journal, just for me, not to record bills or grocery lists or reminders for the kids, but to capture this moment. The turning point, the quiet decision to reclaim my life. I wrote about being a mother, about being invisible, about how silence from those you love hurts more than any insult. I wrote about the moment my own child told his daughter, "Nobody's at the door," as I stood right there with a suitcase in hand and love pouring from my chest. And I wrote about the power of enough, of knowing when you've reached the edge of giving and deciding not to go over it. The next morning, I took one last walk around the neighborhood. I passed families bundled in coats, children tossing snowballs, holiday decorations still clinging to rooftops. I didn't envy them. I didn't feel bitter. I just felt quiet. Hold on at the airport. I declined Jacob's last-minute call. He had left 3 voicemails in the span of an hour, each one progressively more emotional. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. Can we talk before you leave? But I didn't listen to any of them because apologies that come only after the money stops flowing aren't apologies at all. They're negotiations on the plane. I sat by the window. The engines roared to life, and as the wheels left the tarmac, I felt something shift. It was subtle but undeniable. A shedding of roles, of regrets, of years spent asking to be seen. I wasn't just leaving Boston. I was leaving behind every version of myself that begged for scraps of affection. I arrived in Thailand 22 hours later, greeted by warmth, literal and emotional. The guest house by the river was simple but clean. The staff smiled without agenda. I unpacked slowly, savoring the fact that no one needed anything from me. That evening, as I watched lanterns float across the water, I realized something profound. I hadn't lost my family. I had lost their version of me, the one who always said yes, who never asked for anything, who was convenient. But now I was building something else. Not a
Future.
legacy, not a role, a life. And maybe one day they'll call. Again, maybe they'll come not because they want help, but because they finally see me as I am. If not, that's okay to. Because for the first time, I am not waiting at anyone's door. A week had passed since I landed in Thailand. Each morning, I woke to the sound of the Chao Phraya River lapping gently outside my window. Monks in saffron robes passed by on their alms walk. Local children waved as they walked to school, their laughter light as the breeze. For the first time in years, I was no longer anyone's mother, bank, or afterthought. I was just me, Eleanor Brooks, a woman who had spent 33 years giving everything she had to raise a family, only to be told, on Christmas no less, that she had the wrong house. But I hadn't come here to mourn. I came to rediscover, to remember what it felt like to be present. In my own life, I spent mornings volunteering at a local clinic. The work was simple, but meaningful, taking blood pressures, checking pulses, listening to stories from elderly villagers who reminded me of myself in quieter, more grounded ways. In the afternoons, I wandered markets filled with spices and flowers, unfamiliar words, and warm smiles. And in the evenings, I wrote, not to vent, not to explain, but to record the life I was finally claiming as my own. One afternoon, while walking along the river bank, I received another message. This time, it was from Sophie. Mom, I told Emma you were traveling. She asked where. I said Thailand. She drew you a picture. Said she misses you. Attached was a child's crayon drawing. Me, smiling, with a suitcase in one hand and a sun. The sky, in the corner, a curved heart. It was the first genuine expression of love I'd seen in years, and it didn't come from my children. It came from a grandchild I barely knew. I cried, quietly, under the shade of a temple gate, not because I was sad, but because I had finally stopped waiting to be loved the way I deserved, and love, pure and unexpected, had found its way to me. Anyway, later that week, I sent back a postcard. On the front, a painted elephant in vibrant colors. On the back, I wrote, tell him I'm smiling too, and that grandma loves her very much. I didn't include money. I didn't ask for anything. I just gave what I still had left to give. My heart, my attention, my peace. And as I mailed that card, I knew something clearly. I may not have raised children who remembered how to treat a mother, but maybe, just maybe, I could help raise a generation of grandchildren who would, and that hope, that was enough to begin again.